Hello, everyone. Tonight we're relaxing with a story about a medieval child but not a child in a fairy tale or a Hollywood movie, but a child born into a world of rotting straw, distant church bells, and the musty smell of time. A place where every birth can be a life or death gamble. You might think, what's so terrible about giving birth? But you probably won't survive. No anesthesia. No clean water, no doctor, maybe not even your husband, just an old midwife with trembling hands and constant prayer. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Don't forget to comment your location and local time. Now turn off the lights, turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's start our night journey together. You were born in a stable. At dawn in winter, the wind blew through the planks, and the sky was as gray as cold ash. Your mother groaned all night, clutching the rope hanging from the rafters as she pushed. There was no bed, no pillow, just a makeshift pile of straw on the ground and a muddy wool blanket. The midwife, Marjorie, was a 60-year-old widow with sparse teeth and a hairy mole. She had never gone to medical school, but she had delivered nearly 4 dozen babies, only half of whom survived. When you were born, she would slap your bottom with a wooden spoon to make you cry. Otherwise, your soul would not be received. You cry, loud and strong. Your mother laughs through her tears, then passes out from blood loss. The midwife cuts the umbilical cord with a red-hot iron dagger, places you on a piece of sheepskin, and whispers a spell in Latin, not to bless you, but to keep you from the evil spirits that are said to lurk around weak mothers. You are wrapped like a rice cake, your limbs stretched out, unable to move. It is believed that babies need to be straightened from the start, or they will grow up crooked and ugly. One hand holds your head to keep it straight, the other tightly wrapped in linen, soaked in ash, to absorb moisture and repel insects. Then you were placed in a basket, near the hearth, not too close to burn, not too far away to freeze. Every few hours, someone would turn you over, so you wouldn't cross your eyes. Sometimes it was your mother, sometimes your 10-year-old sister, sometimes a drunk man who passed by and lent a hand. Outside, the church bells are ringing. Another child has been born. A new soul has entered the world, and the church wants to acknowledge it as soon as possible. But you can't be baptized yet. You're too weak, and your mother doesn't have the strength to go to church yet. Historians still debate whether it is true that unbaptized babies are lost forever if they die young. Some say it is just a folk belief. Others claim that in the 12th to 14th centuries, many families poured water over their children's heads if the priest did not arrive in time. Strange fact, some midwives used to keep a vial of holy water in their cloth bags for emergency baptisms of premature babies, with urine and salt. Better than nothing, they said. You survived. Hard to believe, but true. Though your first breath was a cold breath that smelled of wood smoke and milk gushing from your mother's breast. She had a fever for 3 days, eating nothing but oatmeal and prayer. Your father? He stood outside the barn, chewing grass and worrying. Not about you, but about the cow that was about to give birth, and that was the family's only real asset. Do you know what the first thing your mother said after waking up was not, "Where's my son?" but "Is he alive?" A question that was not clear whether it was directed at herself, at you, or at the fragile hope that you both had. And you, at that moment, were still lying in the basket, fast asleep, hands clutching a handful of coarse cloth, chest heaving, and for a moment, someone thought, maybe, this time, this child will really grow up. You grew up in a wood basket, placed in the corner of the fireplace. Every morning, before the rooster crowed, your mother would wake up to milk the goat. You would sleep, curled up like a snail. Every time you turned over, the cloth wrapped around you would come loose a little, and your mother would have to wrap it up again with her cold hands, muttering something like, "Grow up quickly. Don't get sick. Don't be sick." The constant prayer of all mothers in those days. There were no plastic toys, no strollers, no cribs, but you had wooden spoons, old linen towels sewn into dolls, and a string of brass bells to swing from your fingers. The fun didn't last long, though, until the church bells rang, announcing a mass for a neighbor's child who had died of typhus. It was normal for children to die. There were mothers who gave birth to 5 children and kept only one. They did not hold a funeral for each child, just a newborn shirt hanging by the stove and a look of unceasing sadness. You are still alive, even though you had whooping cough at just a few months old and almost suffocated when you sucked on the cloth your mother had wrapped around your nipples to keep them warm. Do you remember the time you had a rash that bled so badly that they covered you with ashes mixed with vinegar? The smell lingers in your memory like the smell of a scorched pot in early winter. When you learned to crawl, the whole family rejoiced as if you had had a bumper crop, not because of your remarkable development, but because now you could crawl to find your mother instead of crying all day because you were hungry. Your mother was trying to spin yarn with her hands, with her feet, with her breathing, which was getting weaker after a long coughing spell. Official historical fact: during the 13th to 14th centuries, there was a 10-year cold spell called the Little Cold. More children died from the cold than from disease. Mothers rubbed lard on their children's foreheads to keep them warm, and people taught each other to smother children in hot ashes. Have you ever been laid down on that bag of ashes? It is hot, smells of hay, and sometimes crawls with bugs. But they say, what can burn chaff will help children live. Little secret, some families keep a cat just for their children to sleep with because they believe the cat will absorb the fever. And if the cat dies, the fever god has been sacrificed. You don't remember the name of your first cat, but you remember one night it lay next to you with its eyes wide open, and the next morning it didn't wake up. Historians still debate whether the belief in healing cats is a relic of pre-Christian beliefs or simply a peasant solution to poverty. But you don't need a reason. Your fever breaks that night. When you learn to walk, the world opens up like a field of morning dew. Each step on the cold ground is a feat, but at the same time, it is also the beginning of responsibility. You learn to unclip the straw from a sheep's back, count the eggs in a basket, and, unbelievably, wash your face in icy water at dawn. Cleanliness keeps the devil away. Your mother always says, though you doubt the muddy water will repel anything but flies. Strange fact, in some places, people don't wash their hands, believing that the more dirty your hands are, the more disease-free they are. But you're forced to scrub thoroughly every time you come back from the pigsty, with water boiled with oak bark, which tastes bitter like medicine. One spring morning, you almost slipped down a well while trying to see a tadpole swimming. Your mother was both angry and happy. Angry because you were naughty, happy because you were old enough to be naughty. Remember that well. Smooth stone edges, green moss, and the echo of a rooster crowing echoing from the depths like a trapped soul. It was like a fairy tale, where people believed a witch lived at the bottom and could trade a healthy child for a wish. You don't need a wish. You just need to live another day. Every time you open your eyes, it's a miracle, a sigh of relief from your mother. And once again, she gently strokes your hair, whispering, "Don't be sick, my child." You turned 3 and started learning proper words. Not cutesy ones like candy or a teddy bear, but coal, pot, coal, and don't. Don't came up most often. Don't touch the stove. Don't hold the scissors. Don't spill the kettle. Partly because you were tall enough to reach anything dangerous, and partly because no one had time to sit around watching you all day. Your mother is busy mending pants, coaxing you while threading a needle, and your sister is learning to knit while keeping the baby goat from jumping on the table. Survival is a family affair, literally. Do you remember the first time you were sent to fetch water from the pail in the yard? The wooden pail was as heavy as an upturned boat, and the ladle was slippery with mud. You fumbled so much that you poured the whole ladleful of water on yourself, and your lips were cold and bruised all afternoon. But no one blamed you. Your mother just covered you with a towel and said, "Now you know how to avoid spilling." This is how children were taught in the Middle Ages, through mistakes and shivers. There were no blackboards, no kindergartens, no animated videos singing the alphabet. Instead, you learned by watching your mother's hands chopping vegetables, your father's muddy feet returning from the fields, and the sigh every time a hen accidentally laid eggs in a basket of onions. Official historical fact. In many European villages in the 14th century, children as young as 3 began helping with light chores, keeping fires, picking rocks out of fields, holding lamps for adults. By age 5, many were responsible for looking after younger siblings or untangling threads from looms. You have not yet been given the rope, but you have been assigned to guard the pig pen door. All you need is a bamboo stick and a threatening ee to keep the sow from breaking out into the yard. You do it very seriously. Your face is red. Your feet are buried in the mud like a fortress guard. When the pig slips and falls into a puddle, you laugh hysterically because you think you have used magic. Weird fact, there are records that in some parts of England, it was believed that children could bless livestock if they touched them before sunrise. And so, in the spring, children were often carried out to the barns before dawn to bless. Remember the time you were picked up, half asleep, with snot on your hands, and shoved against the back of a cow that was groaning in labor? You don't remember what happened, but you remember the warm fur of the cow, and the smell of something like yogurt mixed with dirt. Historians still debate whether the blessing of children's hands was an ancient agricultural ritual or just a folk explanation for the phenomenon of luck in livestock farming. But you know for sure, the cow gave birth successfully that day, and you got an extra bowl of hot porridge. Your childhood is not measured by birthdays, but by seasons. When the oak tree shed its leaves, you got to wear your sister's old shirt. When the hailstorm hit, you found shelter in the hayloft. When the rice ripened, you tasted the first warm grains from your mother's hands. Each season came like a new chapter, with its own scents, its own chores, its own worries. One summer afternoon, you followed your mother to dry fish. They were small river fish, hung on hemp ropes and left to dry in the sun on the kitchen roof. When her back was turned, you secretly plucked one and stuffed it into your mouth. Still raw. That sensation, fishy, crunchy, and a little suffocating, was your first snacking experience. Do you remember? Your mother remembers, because right after that, you threw up all over her leg, and instead of scolding her, she just sighed. Okay, now you know that raw fish is not like bread. You start asking questions, lots of them. Why doesn't the sky fall? Who lights the sun every morning? Why do cows have 4 legs and I only have 2? And no one has a straight answer, but they're all patient, or making up stories. Your mother says the sun is pulled by a rope of fire, and if it's cloudy, it's because the rope is wet. You believe everything. Why not? Everything in your world is alive. The stove knows hot and cold, the chickens talk, and the beanstalk can hear you cry when you're sad. The night you had a high fever, curled up in a haystack, you dreamed that the bean plant in the yard gave you a bowl of honey water. When you woke up in the morning, the bowl was real, but it turned out that your grandmother had mixed it at cockcrow. You survive again, and this time, you're so grateful you hug the beanstalk and cry. Childhood memories are like that, full of tears, damp smells, quick hugs, and dry cracked hands. But you are older now. You can walk steadily, wipe your nose, know which is the spoon for eating and which is the spoon for stirring medicine. And above all, you know how to avoid drowning in a well, freezing to death on the ground, and suffocating under a cow's feet. Somehow, you've become a medieval child who survived. And that, back then, was no small feat. You're 6 years old, and the best thing you can do isn't read or count, but run faster than the hens when collecting eggs. Because now you've been given a new assignment. Collect the eggs every morning before someone else steps on the nest. Or worse, the eggs get eaten by a snake. Early in the morning, with the dew still covering the straw, you quietly slip through the nettles, listening for the familiar clucking sound. And when you hear it, you jump like a cat, reach into the straw, and pull out a pale white, still warm treasure. You learn not to brag too early. If you do, your mother will say, "If you're good, do more." And so, one day you go to collect a whole batch of eggs, bring them home with a full apron, only to slip and break more than half of them on the kitchen threshold. There are no hard-boiled eggs, and raw eggs are all over your feet. As your grandmother wipes them away, she mutters, "There's no more breakfast." That's how you learn the big lesson. The work is not done until you wash your hands and polish your shoes. Official historical fact. According to medieval records of rural life, children as young as 5 and 7 years old were involved in the family labor chain. In many regions, they were considered little hands, responsible for light, agile tasks, picking worms from leaves, gathering eggs, holding the lamp in a textile factory, or driving the geese back to the coop. You don't like geese. They're scary, have teeth in their tongues, and seem to know you're scared. Every time you pick up your bamboo stick, they glare at you like your soup isn't salty enough. But you loved going to the weaving workshop. It was a dark room, filled with the creaking of the loom and the smell of fresh linen. As your mother spun the yarn, you sat by her side, untangling the threads and listening to stories. Stories about the man who was turned into a frog for daring to cut the magic thread. About the girl who dropped her shuttle and found a treasure in a crack in the floor. You don't know how much of it is true, but you like how the story makes the wooden frame a portal to another world. Do you remember the first time you spun a long, even thread? Your mother complimented you. "Your thread is as straight as a fairy's hair." Your sister said, "Yeah, but it's probably as tangled as her head." You glared at her, but inside you were as light as flax in the sun. Strange fact, records from the 13th century show that some villages had children wear amulets around their necks when working near looms, because it was believed that the sound of weaving could summon spirits. The amulets were often made of birch wood and engraved with scissors and the sun to ward off evil spirits from the workshop. You used to wear one like that. The leather strap was short. The wooden face had teeth marks from biting it when you were sleepy. And though you didn't know what the evil spirit was, you felt safe wearing it, like someone was watching you work and not letting you fall. Historians still debate whether the beliefs surrounding weaving originated in pre-Christian ritual or were simply a spiritual response to a tedious task. But you know this. The steady creaking lulls you to sleep better than songs. You do it, and for the first time, you see a look of genuine pride from an adult. Not "how cute," but "now he can help." It's a warm, heavy feeling, like you're being recognized as a person. One afternoon, you were allowed to go with your father to the field. It was not like home. It was wide, windy, and the sun was right on your neck. Your father picked a grain of rice and gave it to you to taste. It tasted bitter, but after chewing for a long time, it had a sweet aftertaste like sugarcane husk. "This is what bread is made of," he says. You look at the tiny handful of grains, then at his hands, tarry and calloused. like the stump of an oak tree. You suddenly understand. No bread comes out of the oven. It passes from hand to hand, through mud, through straw, through fire, to your hands. That afternoon, you fell asleep on the back of an ox plowing, your head in a sack of straw, your hair covered with hay seeds, and you dreamed that you were a seed, thrown into the sky, falling to the ground, and growing into a talking bread tree. You tell your mother about your dream. She says, "If you make that tree, remember to let me pick it first." You smile, because now you know that dreaming is also part of the job. It helps you endure rainy days without enough firewood, meals of only vegetable porridge, and cracked feet from the cold. You are no longer the little kid who cries when he gets his hands dirty. You are the kid who knows how to gather eggs, untangle threads, avoid getting pecked by geese, and knows that when your father doesn't say anything during dinner, tomorrow will be tough. Your world has never been easy, but as you do, you begin to understand how it works. Every thread, every basket, every sigh. And as you sit blowing on your bleeding fingers from removing thorns from a pile of firewood, you think, this is me growing up. You are 10 years old, and you see someone giving birth for the first time. Not a church scene, not a stained glass painting. It was real, raw, painful, sweaty, and bloody. The woman was your cousin, only 15, and her belly was as full as a bag of flour that hadn't been tied tightly. You were called not to help, but to learn. The midwife said, "Show him, so that later he won't fall over like a newborn calf." You feel embarrassed, but everyone is too busy to notice you. Someone rubbing your back, someone boiling water, someone praying. You sit by the door, watching her moan, her face burning red. You think, if this is what it takes to have a baby, then I'll just get a cat. Official historical fact. In the 15th century, women almost always gave birth at home, with the help of a midwife, an elderly woman whose experience often passed down through her family. In villages, midwives were considered people who could talk to God, because every birth was a life-threatening situation. No anesthesia, no scalpels, no insurance, just prayers, a charm hanging from the bed, and a bowl of meat porridge to nourish him afterwards if he lived to eat it. Your sister was alive, but as weak as a leaf hanging on a dry branch. When the baby cried for the first time, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. You trembled, not because of fear, but because you understood. Realized that one does not have children. One snatches them from the jaws of death. Weird fact, there was a belief in northern England during the Middle Ages that if a woman gave birth on a full moon, her child would hear the crows talking. This may have stemmed from the full moon's association with the tides, and childbirth was a blood tide specifically for women. The child in the story was born on the full moon, and a few weeks later, you saw him laughing at the sound of the wind blowing through the chimney. He talks to the wind. Your sister whispered, her chest still aching, her hands still shaking, her eyes bright as a rainy night. Historians still debate whether the high mortality rate in childbirth was due primarily to poor sanitation, poor diet, or religious customs that forbade medical intervention. But whatever the cause, women gave birth in the shadow of uncertainty, and you, even a child, felt it like a chill from a stone floor to the back of your neck. You helped boil herbal water to bathe the woman in labor. Mugwort, chrysanthemum, willow bark, the scent is fragrant, but mixed with the smell of blood, sweat, and survival. You fold towels, wash dishes, and for the first time here. Good job. This is the right way to do it. You're proud, but also scared, because you know, next time it could be your mom, or your sister, or you. You ask the midwife, if the pain is too much, will people die? She stops, looks at you, and says, pain doesn't kill people. It's when there's no one around. And you know, from that moment on, you will never leave anyone alone. You observe the days that follow. People rub the mother's belly with warm wine, put hot towels on her feet, place the baby in a wool-lined basket near the fireplace. Some people embroider the child's name on a piece of cloth, like a thread tied to a tree, so it won't be blown away by the wind. You also embroidered a small picture, a cat sitting looking at the moon. No one complimented you, but you saw her smile. One night, you wake up to find your sister lulling your baby to sleep with the lullaby that your grandmother used to sing. Go to sleep, my child. Don't be afraid of the rain. Rain is the code for the old rice grains. The song drifts through the night, like dew on a pond. You realize, childbirth isn't just pain, it's rebirth. Motherhood isn't about being loved again. It's about dissolving and coming back together, thread by thread. You remember the look in her eyes in pain. No resentment, no despair. Just one thing. Faith that after all, her child would live. You think, maybe that's the most wonderful thing. What about you? You're not ready, but you've started preparing. Not for the pain, but for the moment when someone needs you. And you don't back down. Because you have seen birth. You have heard the first sound. And you know, every child is a promise, engraved in bone, sprouted in blood, and no one can cancel it once it has been uttered. You are 14 years old, and for the first time you have to keep a child alive through winter. It's not your baby. It's your sister's baby, and she's in a feverish delirium from childbirth. You, the youngest, are suddenly the only conscious person in a freezing house, with a rocking crib and a rusty door cranking cough coming from the bed next door. Winter came early that year. Rain poured down like it was about to drown the bones. The wind crept through the cracks in the bricks and doors and put out the fire before you could even light it. The baby was sniffling and wheezing, and his little head was as hot as a hot iron. You were never taught how to care for a baby, but you saw your mother apply vinegar towels. You saw your grandmother burn sage to ease a cold, and you promised yourself you would never leave anyone alone. You cradle him against your chest, inside the wool sweater, skin to skin. His little head nuzzles against your sternum like a lost kitten seeking warmth. You whisper, "Hold on, just for tonight." Official historical fact: infant mortality in the Middle Ages was extremely high. In some areas, nearly half of all infants died before their first birthday. This was due not only to disease, but also to a lack of medical knowledge, poor hygiene, poor nutrition, and harsh climates. The only way to survive was to be held by someone overnight. You do this for 3 nights in a row. Every time the baby whimpers, put your hand on its chest and hum the old lullaby. Every time your sister gets delirious, you bring a spoonful of herbal water to your lips. Every time the fire dies down, you go out into the yard in the rain to pick up more dry twigs, though your hands are shaking and your feet are covered in mud. You think, why does everyone say love is light? Love, apparently, is mud, musty, weeping in the middle of the night. But you love, and that is the only thing that does not fall in this cold. Weird fact: in some parts of Scandinavia during the Middle Ages, people burned dried cow dung under their newborns' cribs to keep them warm. It sounds gross, but properly fermented dung is almost odorless and smolders all night long. You wish you had that because you're out of firewood and you're thinking about burning the furniture. Historians still debate whether children survived the winter thanks to family care or community structure. There are accounts of a village taking turns looking after the weakest children. But you know, that night, there was no one but you. You tie up the windows with old string. You tie the last coat as a curtain. You boil water in a rusty iron pot and stir it with your bare hands so it doesn't burn. Your hands blister. Your heart beats like a drum. You think, if I don't do it, who will? And in that question, You become an adult. On the morning of the fourth day, my friend sat up. Her eyes were still blurry, and her lips were still white, but she was able to say one sentence. "Is he alive?" You nodded. Then you fell asleep next to the crib, your hand still on the baby's chest. A neighbor woman later said, "There was a child who survived the winter because God slept in someone's coat." You said nothing, but you remember very clearly the soft breathing of the child against your heart, like a second beat, smaller, but full of hope. You don't tell anyone, but from then on, whenever you see a newborn baby, you look at it a little longer. You're no longer afraid of the cold. You understand that sometimes keeping the fire burning isn't about keeping the light on. It's about keeping someone else from freezing to death. You hang a small piece of cloth by the fireplace, embroidered with a cradle with two hands around it. No one asks, but you know it's an oath that if a baby cries when no one wants to hear, you will be the one to listen. That if a child is about to die, you will give your last breath to it, and that if you have children someday, they will be covered not only in your blood, but also in the sleepless nights you spent because of someone else. You ask yourself, "I will never forget that night." You are right. You have your first child. This time it's your own. You think you're prepared. You've lived through winter nights with other people. Every bundle of firewood, every blanket, every spoonful of porridge imprinted in your memory. But when your own baby lets out his first cry, a tiny, red, wet scream like a stretched out string, you know, nothing really prepares you for this. The baby looks like you. Dimpled cheeks, thick eyebrows, tiny limbs like young mustard greens. You look at your baby, and your chest feels like someone is squeezing it with their bare hands. Out of love, out of fear, out of not wanting to lose it. Your husband stood nearby, his face pale. He had never cut raw flesh, never held the hand of a dead person, but he had just held the baby that had emerged from you, covered in blood and amniotic fluid, his hands shaking as he refused to let go. You think, we really did this. A new being has just been called out of the darkness. Official history. In 14th to 15th century Europe, home births were common. Informal midwives, often elderly village women, led the proceedings. There was no anesthesia, no sterilization. Blood, sweat, and magic mingled by candlelight. You are washed with herbal water. The midwife puts a cloth soaked in chamomile water on your forehead. You are so tired that you can no longer hear anyone else, only the baby, wrapped in your husband's old sweater, breathing like a small bellows. You don't know if your baby will survive. Every cough is a knife to your chest. You check the fontanelle every morning, count the breaths every night, put your cheek to your baby's to make sure it's warm. Strange fact, many people believe that babies must be anchored into the world with symbolic objects. Some regions use a silver spoon by the crib. Others tie a strand of the mother's hair around the baby's wrist. You, for one, secretly place under your baby's pillow a button you wore as a baby. A wooden button, old but round. Your husband is not good at lullabies, but he tries. He makes up his own song with silly rhymes. You are a little onion / if you don't cry. I will kiss your cheek / if you cry a lot. I will kiss your pillow. You smile even though you have a fever. You wrap your baby in a hand-embroidered cloth from your wedding day, now transformed from decoration to a more important task, keeping him alive. Historians still debate whether medieval lullabies had any practical use or were just tradition. One theory is that the slow tempo and low pitch help regulate a baby's heartbeat. Some ancient manuscripts contain lullabies with strange lyrics like, "Go to sleep lest the devil take you away," or "I lull you to sleep lest the crows caw." You don't sing. You just repeat a phrase. Mother is here. The first week is chaos. Your breasts hurt. Your milk doesn't come in. Your baby spits up and then drinks. There are times when you think your baby has stopped breathing. then realizes he's just in a deep sleep. There are times when you burst into tears because you don't know what to do when your baby won't stop crying. Then one morning you open your eyes and your baby is looking back at you. Not crying, not moving, just looking. Not yet rational, but present. You whisper, "Hello, baby. I'm new here too." You carefully cut your child's nails with a small knife, the kind you use to peel apples. You hold it over the fire to clean it, then silently pray. Only cut the nail, not the body. You dare not be careless with small things. You hang a bag of dried herbs by the door and a white cloth under the crib. You rub your baby's belly with sage oil, singing the song your mother used to sing to you. And when the neighbors come to congratulate you, they bring you cakes, wine, and pieces of cloth. You accept everything, but hold your baby close to your chest, as if anyone could make it disappear if they got too close. You begin to understand why some mothers back then chose not to name their babies in the first week. They didn't want to get attached and then have to say goodbye. But you were different. You named your baby on the first night, a name that ended in a small fire, whispery, warm, not easily extinguished. The first weekend night, you sit alone, holding your child, looking out the window. The moon is full. You whisper, "If you survive this season, I swear I will teach you how to walk in the snow, how to cook porridge, how to tell stories." You don't sleep, but you're safe. And the baby, for the first time, sleeps for 3 hours straight. You exhale. Here we go. You are used to the sound of crying at night, but you have never seen a baby stay silent for so long. Not only is your baby growing, but he is also starting to explore the world around him in a very medieval way. Everything is strange, needs to be touched, tasted, felt. You remember the early days of holding your baby in a thick wool blanket, cradling him in your arms, listening to the wind whistling outside the window. But now that he's crawling, you have to be more vigilant. Small stones on the cold ground can be uncomfortable. The fire is always a danger, and the big dogs in the village may see him as prey. Official historical fact: in medieval rural areas, children were often left to their own devices quite early, starting to crawl or walk at 9 months. Parents did not have many toys, so nature, plants, and household items, such as wooden spoons or balls of wool, served as toys. Despite the lack of safety, children thrived if they were lucky enough to avoid illness and accidents. You begin to teach your child the first lessons, not with words, but with actions. How to recognize a ripe apple, how to stay away from a red-hot stove, how to sit still when adults are talking. Every time your child is naughty and spills water or a bucket of firewood, you just chuckle and gently remind him, "It's okay. Be careful next time." You notice something interesting. Your baby loves to hear you murmur stories, even if he doesn't understand a word. Fairy tales, legends about knights, princesses, and dragons all come to life when told in a soft, even voice like breathing. You still remember the story of Princess Eleanor, who gave birth and raised her child in a cold room in the castle. She once wrote, "Children are a light in the darkness of our lives, though the light may go out at any moment." This quote makes you think a lot about the fragility of life. Curious fact: there are parts of the countryside where newborns are wrapped tightly in coarse linen, not allowed to move their limbs much, in the belief that this will strengthen their bones. But there are also regions where it is believed that allowing babies to move freely helps their brains develop better. You see a balance, sometimes swaddled for sleep, but also let them splash around in the gentle afternoon sun. You and your husband share the responsibility of raising the baby. He's not a very skilled man, but he laughs when the baby laughs and holds the baby when you need a break. It's a valuable support, and you thank the heavens for it. Historians still debate whether medieval children were nurtured as emotionally as they are today, or whether they were simply little adults who had to learn quickly to survive. Some argue that, due to high mortality rates, many families were less emotionally expressive to protect themselves from the pain of loss. But you, even in that world, cannot help but feel a strong love for your little one. You learn to make your baby's meals light and easy to digest: thin oatmeal, fruit juice with honey, and small pieces of bread. Each meal is a mini battle, with your baby both eager and stubborn. You laugh when you remember the first time your baby splattered porridge all over your hair, and you had to negotiate with him to finish it. At night, you hold your child in your arms, listening to his steady breathing. You whisper, "What did you learn today? Do you know how to love? Or do you just know how to cry?" You gradually understand that raising children is not just a physical thing, but also a journey of emotions, hope, and constant perseverance. You're used to the sleepless nights when the wind outside the window mixed with your baby's weak cries makes you tired and sad. Now that your baby is crawling and babbling, each sound is a small miracle in the midst of life's challenges. You can clearly feel the change, not only in your baby, but also in yourself, from initial anxiety to patience that gradually becomes strength. You remember the long, drizzly days in the fields when you had to cover your children with coarse cloth while your neighbors patched their own clothes. Every day was a battle with the harsh weather, disease, and deprivation. Hard beds made of rough wood, thin animal skins, all just to keep your children warm on the cold winter nights. Official historical fact: in the 14th and 15th centuries, infant mortality rates in Europe were extremely high, with 30 to 50% of infants not surviving their first year. Mothers often relied on folk herbal remedies and traditional methods to help their children overcome fevers and stomach aches without modern medical help. You remember the story from a woman living in the French countryside who wrote, "Every time my child cries, my heart is torn in two, but I know I must be strong so that he can live." That is the common sentiment of medieval mothers, the silent warriors of the family. Weird fact, in many regions, it is believed that the laughter of a newborn baby can ward off evil spirits and diseases, so mothers often sing ancient lullabies, sometimes with tiny spells, to protect their children. You can try it. It may not work, but at least it makes you feel closer to your child. You start teaching your child to perceive the world through his senses. Feel the coldness of the water, the scent of flowers, the sound of birds singing in the yard. These simple lessons are not only for your child, but also help you understand more about the simple but colorful life of the Middle Ages. You find yourself becoming much more patient. When your baby is fussy with colic or discomfort, you gently pat him, hold his hand, and whisper comforting words, knowing that you can't always comfort him right away. You remember what a famous physician of the time said: "A calm heart can heal more than any medicine." Historians still debate whether medieval families truly developed the deep emotional bonds that we have today, or whether they were forced by harsh circumstances to maintain an emotional distance to protect themselves from the constant pain of loss. But you know, even in the darkest of times, love for your child burns like a small fire in the night. You also learn how to prepare nutritious dishes from available ingredients, such as corn porridge, vegetable soup, and fruit juice diluted with honey. You carefully monitor every sign of your baby's likes and dislikes, nourishing both the body and the young soul. At night, you hold your baby close to you, feeling his steady heartbeat in a rare peace. You whisper to him that no matter how difficult life gets, you will always be here, with him through every storm. You are sitting by the narrow window, the pale moonlight shining through the wooden door, covering the little face sleeping in your arms. Now, after all the trials and tribulations, you realize that the medieval parenting journey is not only about resilience, but also a lesson in unconditional love. A love as simple and pure as the water of a spring in the middle of a deep forest. You remember the early days, when your baby's cries sounded like a new battle cry. You trudged through the cold winter, when hunger pangs and disease lurked outside the cold stone walls. Now your baby is smiling, calling your name in innocent sounds, and taking steps on the rickety wooden floors of your small house. Official historical facts. Documents from the 14th and 15th centuries show that the survival of young children largely depended on the meticulous care of their mothers and communities, in addition to the good fortune of avoiding disease and accidents, which you have experienced more than once in the past few months. You remember the strange story of the witch in the neighboring village, who once helped you make a magical amulet from herbs to protect your child from illness. Although scholars still debate the true effectiveness of such methods, you believe in this little miracle, like a small light in the dark. You chuckle at the thought of the times when you had to hide warm towels, herbal potions, and nighttime stories, all as weapons to fight the cruelty of the times. You wonder if the sunscreen you use today sticks to your skin like a piece of armor. Medieval armor might not be much more comfortable, but at least you don't have to bake in it. You realize that, despite your struggles, you are never alone. Family, neighbors, and even acquaintances share your burdens and joys, even if it is just a look of understanding or a hasty meal shared around a small fire. On the last night of the story, you feel lighter than ever. You close your eyes, listening to the steady breathing of your child beside you, the wind blowing through the dry leaves outside the window, and the soft, lulling whisper of time. All difficulties will pass, and you will continue on that path, even though there are scars to mark it. Historians still debate whether medieval motherhood can be compared to modernity, but you know, in your heart, that nothing has changed, that love has given strength and hope through every harsh day and night. Now, as you close the last page of your journey, let your heart settle, let your soul be at ease, as light as the leaves falling at the end of the season. You and your child have walked through a difficult time, a world that is both cruel and full of small miracles. Now, you can let go of all your worries, feel the warmth in your arms, and drift off into a peaceful sleep, like a flickering candle in the long night.